The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I now call on the member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And it's with pleasure that I join the debate here today, and I thank other members for their contributions, which I've followed with a great deal of interest, and quite thought-provoking contributions they've been. Now, this bill amends the Offshore Petroleum Act for 2006 to establish a system of offshore titles that will authorise the transportation by pipeline and injection and storage of greenhouse gas substances in deep geological formations under the seabed. I rise to express my general support for the bill and the process it seeks to facilitate, being the sequestration of greenhouse gases and primarily carbon dioxide. But certainly in supporting the process, I must report a growing level of scepticism in my own community about this issue of man-induced climate change and the government's proposed response, particularly the emissions trading scheme. I certainly accept that climate variability is real, but how much of that we are experiencing right now in my particular region, how much of that we put down to permanent change or whether it's a drought event is certainly a subject of much debate within my community. And I also seek to put on the public record the overwhelming need for better education and community understanding of the quite complex issues we're dealing with here. Terms like geosequestration and carbon capture and storage and climate change itself, I think we need to involve our communities more in this entire discussion. And I think there is room, a great deal of room in fact, for a more mature and robust debate around all of these issues and the possible solutions without the need to be stereotyping people as sceptics or as true believers. Deputy Speaker, I think there is a great deal of goodwill in my community for action to protect the environment. As a whole, Gippslanders are very passionate about our local environment, and we have thousands of volunteers in groups like Landcare who are getting their hands dirty and doing that really practical environmental work that's required in our region. We have farmers who are investing in nutrient reduction programs and whole-of-farm plans to improve water quality, which is such a critical issue for the people of Gippsland and the Gippsland lakes themselves. And we have many industries which are investing in technology to clean up their own operations. But I still believe there is a great deal of confusion about climate change, and the government's proposed response with the emissions trading scheme is cause for concern. I think we need a proper debate and we need to canvass all of the possible solutions. And a classic example is the issue of sequestering carbon in the soil. It's briefings that I've received on this issue alone, certainly from my perspective, demand further investigation because of the real prospect we have of improving our agricultural production through better soil conditions while achieving the government's desired aim to deal with carbon emissions. And I think that has some exciting possibilities for us, and I'll be following that up with the industry involved. If the government was prepared, I think, to debate these types of issues in completely good faith, I think it would start by immediately withdrawing the climate change propaganda campaign, which is currently screening on our TVs. I think this type of television advertising with its graphic images is purely designed to do the groundwork for the government in terms of its climate change policies, and I think scaring the community in the hope that there will be no resistance to an emissions trading scheme and trying to dumb down the debate does none of us any great credit. And I think the massive cost and the prospect of job losses that are related to the emissions trading scheme issue are coming at a time when Australia can least afford it. I'm certainly reserving my position on the emissions trading scheme for those very good reasons. We have not seen the economic modelling at this stage from the government, and we have very limited knowledge in terms of the direct impacts, particularly as they affect regional communities. I fear that we are running headlong into an economic disaster in some regards, which will be most heavily felt in rural and regional communities like my own area of Gippsland. I think the industries that are going to be most exposed to government policy on climate change are going to be those that are primarily located in regional areas, and I'll return to that point perhaps in a few moments' time. But first I want to highlight the potential opportunities that I believe this bill presents in the Gippsland situation. There's no doubt that Gippsland will need to be at the forefront of the research and development to successfully capture and store carbon in the future. We have a strong and vested interest in developing the technology and becoming a major player in this emerging industry. If we can make it work anywhere, Gippsland is going to play a major role in the future. Deputy Speaker, the Gippsland Basin is obviously a major source of oil and gas for our nation. I'm very much a layman when it comes to the issues of geology, but as I understand it, the very same geological formations which have produced the structures for trapping oil and gas beneath the surface make the Gippsland Basin a very attractive proposition for this type of activity. And studies have shown that the Gippsland Basin has the capacity to store very large volumes of carbon dioxide. And it possibly goes without saying that the location of the basin alongside the Latrobe Valley power stations provides an obvious link for this type of activity. Indeed, I think it's regarded by many in the power and the oil industries that this is a possible solution to the CO2 emissions from the brown coal production of the Latrobe Valley. But I do again make the point about the need to hasten slowly in relation to the emissions trading scheme, which I find is inextricably linked to this entire bill. Carbon capture and storage may be the big-ticket item, which provides the answer to the issues facing our brown coal power generators, but we are still several years away from achieving the desired result. It's in no one's interest to jeopardise the economic viability of power generators in the Latrobe Valley by moving too fast or placing too heavy a burden on their operations. And I noted with interest this week, and I refer to comments this week from the Chief Executive Officer at Loy Yang Power, Mr Ian Nethercote, who has flagged his own concerns about the future of this, the future for his industry. And I must stress that Mr Nethercote doesn't oppose an emissions trading scheme, but he is seeking a balanced approach. And I think many in the industry and many in the Gippsland-Latrobe Valley region have a very similar view. Mr Nethercote is quoted in the Latrobe Valley Express this week talking about Professor Garneau's supplementary draft report and the recommendation of a $20 per tonne fixed carbon price. And I quote Mr Nethercote, "If we look at Loy Yang, we would need to find an extra $1 million a day just to cover permit costs. If we then take that a step further, that means for the Latrobe Valley brown coal sector, you need to find about $1.2 billion. That's if it's $20 per tonne. If you take that across the national market, then it comes out to $4 billion a year. The numbers are huge, they're massive." And I think I add that to the debate as a point of caution. People in the Latrobe Valley are just starting to come to terms with what we're talking about here in terms of the emissions trading scheme and the flow and impact it may have to them and their own families' futures. Mr Nethercote also cautions that Professor Garneau's predicted 40% rise in electricity prices could be underestimating the real impact in the future. And I've noted many speakers have made the same point. This is an enormous challenge for us, and the complexity of the issues, I think, requires broader community understanding before we progress too much further down this path. Now, I certainly appreciate that the government is promising structural adjustment packages and compensation to affected households in its green paper, but the sheer scope of the changes and the impacts are not properly understood at the moment in my community. And as I said during my inaugural speech a few weeks ago, if we're prepared to give the planet the benefit of the doubt and we accept that climate change is real, then we're going to need a strong and sustainable economy to deal with all these challenges. And we need to be tackling these challenges from a position of economic strength. And I make that point also in the context of the Gippsland Coastal Board report referring to the prospect of climate change and a 0.8 metre sea level rise, and they're forecasting events which would require relocating of a range of highly valued public assets from the low-lying foreshore areas along the Gippsland coast. We're not going to achieve that unless we're in a position of financial strength. And I'd argue that if the Gippsland coast is exposed to inundation, then there's large sections of metropolitan areas as well. So it's a frightening prospect if these forecasts are accurate, and it's one that it's going to require all levels of government to work in partnership on. So there is a lot riding on these very complex issues. From my perspective, naturally, as a member for Gippsland, my focus is on the Latrobe Valley coal industry, and I think we must retain the commercial viability of the brown coal industry in the valley, because we need these companies to work in partnership with governments to invest in the cleaner coal technology we all talk so much about. It requires a practical and a rational and a steady approach rather than some of the overblown rhetoric that we've been exposed to throughout the debate in recent times. I think having access to an extraordinary natural resource like the 500 years of brown coal is a competitive advantage for our nation, and one we must be very careful to nurture in the future. I think access to low-cost energy has underpinned growth in my region, and I make no apologies today in standing here and standing up for the industry and standing up for jobs in my region. I think we need to keep a very firm sense of perspective throughout this whole debate. Given our nation's contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions is less than 2%, we need to be extremely mindful of the international effort and who we've got on board in this process. Any policy which results in job losses in my region will certainly have an adverse impact on every part of community life throughout Gippsland. And I fear that regional communities like Gippsland are very much at the pointy end of government policy in relation to climate change. For us, it's not some abstract debate about turning a few lights off or having shorter showers. It's about jobs, it's about our families, it's the future of our key industries in the power sector, in our agricultural sector down the track, and also in the oil and gas industry itself. And just in relation to the bill, and as I mentioned, the Gippsland Basin is a major contributor to our nation, and this bill has particular relevance to the region. We have the Longford Gas Plant, which is located about 10 kilometres from the City of Sale, and it's responsible for supplying most of Victoria's gas requirements and about 20% of Australia's oil and gas supplies. And Gippsland has a very long and a proud history of providing resources for our nation, and the oil and gas industry is but one example. And just speaking of the history of the oil and gas industry in our region, I note that in 2009 will be the 40th anniversary of oil and gas production from the Gippsland Basin by SO Australia. And it certainly will be a time of celebration and reflection on the company's major role, certainly in the social, the economic and the cultural development of our region. I add the cultural development quite deliberately because SO has been a major contributor to community facilities in Gippsland, including the Wellington Entertainment Centre in Sale. And SO is highly regarded as a very good corporate citizen, and in my region the company is respected for its contributions to Gippsland, our nation. There are now 21 offshore platforms and installations in Bass Strait, which feed a network of 600 kilometres of underwater pipelines and keep the oil and gas flowing 24 hours a day. And I do digress for a moment to reflect on the fact that Gippslanders haven't always enjoyed the direct benefits from the oil and gas industry, and it does seem somewhat bizarre to me that many towns in my electorate, including my hometown of Lakes Entrance, have missed out on reticulated natural gas. And it's an issue that I intend to work on, hopefully in partnership with genuine support from the relevant state and federal ministers, because we all appreciate, and this bill talks a lot about environmental issues, that natural gas provides a cheaper and more efficient energy source, which is particularly important for communities like Yarram in South Gippsland and Orbost and Lakes Entrance in the east. And we have, as we're all aware, an ageing population, and the opportunity to provide cheaper and cleaner energy is a critical issue, particularly for older Gippslanders. Bottled gas is prohibitively expensive for those on pensions or low incomes, and they're often left with the only alternative of wood heating, and which obviously is going to become a bigger issue for people in their advancing years. Natural gas reticulation to more towns in Gippsland is a challenge for the future that I hope the state and federal governments are willing to work with me on. It's certainly more environmentally friendly and has obvious economic benefits in terms of the energy source for the community. And if we're able to build a pipeline, the Eastern Gas Pipeline, to take gas from Longford to Sydney, then we should be building the infrastructure to allow these economic and environmental benefits to flow to Gippsland communities along the route. I'm certainly pleased to say, however, that the state Labor government has provided natural gas to Bensdale, and under that state government program we've seen a real benefit to industries like Paddy's Foods in Bensdale and the Bensdale Hospital, and there's still more work to be done to continue this rollout of this very efficient and effective form of energy. And I think allowing more Gippsland to share in the benefits of the oil and gas industry in our region is an issue for us all. But having said that, the direct benefits from oil and gas haven't flowed directly to every household in Gippsland. I must stress that there has been overwhelming positives for my community. The oil and gas production in Bass Strait has contributed over $200 billion to gross domestic product over its life, and ExxonMobil's Bass Strait operations have been responsible for generating approximately $300 billion in federal government revenue in real terms. And I think that's another one of the reasons why I'm standing here today in debate of this bill, that protecting the future of the oil and gas industry in Gippsland is so critical to us. I've actually had the opportunity in the past to view the oil and gas production up close, and it's something that I'd encourage other members to do if they get the chance. The offshore platforms themselves are quite remarkable places. They're both a work site and a home for up to 80 people at a time. The platforms themselves are operating in quite a hostile environment in Bass Strait, but they're equipped with a few home comforts for the men and women when they're off duty, with gymnasiums and rec rooms and that type of thing. And having shared a meal with the workers there on the platform several years ago, I can attest to the fact that their kitchens are well equipped to meet the demands, and the workers are well fed. And I say, long may their vital work continue, along with their colleagues in the brown coal industry. I do take up the points made by other members in their contribution to this debate. This bill provides for access rights for geosequestration process, and we will need the appropriate systems in place to protect the rights of the existing users like the oil and gas industry. Obviously that does include oil and gas, but they must have the security to continue to invest with confidence. And I have followed the debate with interest, and I'm heartened by the assurances of those opposite that there is certainty for investment in the future for the oil and gas sector. But it also includes, for me, in the Gippsland electorate, the issue of the commercial fishing industry, which is already finding it difficult to access fishing grounds due to the excised areas around oil and gas platforms, and there is a potential layer of friction there in the future which we will need to resolve, because further activity in the region, and might be related to this bill or in relation to the oil and gas industry itself, further activity in the region is going to have an impact on the important role that the Lakes Entrance fishing fleet plays in helping to feed our nation. Now, I agree with other members who have made the point that we really do need to get this legislative framework right and to ensure that we don't discourage that further investment in other industries with existing uses in the offshore regions. Deputy Speaker, I believe we are all very mindful of the need to act responsibly on this critically important issue. And in my mind, acting responsibly certainly includes protecting our energy security for the future. I certainly commend the previous speakers and the Minister for Resources and Energy on the approach they've taken to this legislation, and I also commend the previous Minister for the work he undertook in this area. There's no question, as I've mentioned and many others have too, this is an incredibly complex area, and I get the feeling there'll be many more debates on this and related topics in the months and years ahead. Thank you.